Gloucestershire, December 1816. The December wind carried the scent of frozen earth and dying roses through the stone arches of St. Nicholas Church, where 70 mourners gathered in black crape and somber silence. Cordelia Jane Morland stood before her mother's coffin, her gloved hands clasped so tightly that they were rigid with strain, and wondered if it was possible for sorrow to feel so sharp yet so dull at the same time. At 24, she had learned to recognize the particular quality of whispers that followed her through drawing rooms and church aisles alike. Poor Mrs. Weston's daughter. Married a duke but couldn't give him an heir. 3 years and nothing to show for it. The words drifted through the cold air like smoke, settling over her shoulders with the weight of a sentence already passed. The coffin before her held all that remained of Dorothea Weston, who had negotiated her daughter's marriage to the Duke of Huntley with the precision of a general planning a siege. £35,000 in exchange for a title and security. A merchant's daughter transformed into a duchess. It had seemed like salvation then, 5 years ago, when her father's debts had threatened to consume them all. Now, standing in the church where she had been baptized, Cordelia understood that some bargains extracted a price far beyond money. If you find yourself moved by stories of courage in the face of impossible heartbreak, please subscribe and share this journey with someone who believes in second chances. What happens next will show you why love must sometimes be lost before it can truly be found. Beside her, Gabriel Tristan Morland, Duke of Huntley, stood with the severe bearing of a man of business rather than a funeral. His profile might have been carved from the same cold marble that lined the church walls. 37 years had given him the bearing of someone accustomed to command, and 3 years of marriage had done nothing to soften the aristocratic distance he maintained between himself and the woman who bore his name. The vicar concluded his remarks with practiced solemnity. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. May Mrs. Dorothea Weston find peace in the embrace of our Lord. Cordelia felt the first tear slip down her cheek, and was grateful for the veil that hid her face from the congregation. Her mother had died suddenly, her heart simply stopping in the middle of an ordinary afternoon. There had been no time for goodbyes, no final words of comfort or advice, only the brutal finality of death and the cold reality of standing alone in a world that had never truly accepted her. The mourners began to file out of the church, their movements creating a rustle of fabric and murmured condolences that filled the space where prayers had been. Cordelia accepted their offerings with mechanical grace. Thank you for coming. Mother would have been touched. Yes, it was very sudden. The words came automatically, leaving her mind free to drift to the more pressing question of what came next. It was then that Gabriel turned to her with an expression she could not quite read. "Remain here," he said, his voice carrying the clipped precision of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. "I have something to address before we depart." Confusion flickered through her grief. "Address? Now?" "Now," he confirmed, and moved to the front of the church where the vicar stood in conversation with Lord Fairfield and his wife. Gabriel raised his hand, and the gesture alone was enough to silence the remaining mourners who had not yet left the building. Cordelia felt a cold dread settle in her stomach, though she could not have said why. Something in his bearing suggested this was not a spontaneous decision, but rather a carefully planned announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen," Gabriel began, his voice carrying easily through the stone space. "Before we disperse, there is a matter that requires clarification regarding my household arrangements." The remaining mourners turned back with varying degrees of curiosity and concern. Cordelia saw Lady Silverton exchange a significant glance with her daughter. Mr. Hastings, the local magistrate, frowned deeply. Even the vicar appeared uncertain about this breach of funeral protocol. Gabriel continued with the same tone he might have used to discuss crop rotations or tenant agreements. "My marriage to Miss Weston, as she was then known, was arranged 3 years ago as a financial transaction designed to preserve the Huntley estates from ruin. That purpose has been admirably served. The properties are now secure, the debts settled, and our obligations to one another fulfilled. Cordelia felt the ground shift beneath her feet. This could not be happening. Not here, not now. Not in front of everyone who had known her mother, everyone who had watched her marry into a family that considered her little better than a necessary evil. However, Gabriel said, and his eyes finally found hers across the distance that separated them. After 3 years of marriage, the union has failed to produce the heir necessary to continue the Huntley line. Given this unfortunate circumstance, I have concluded that continuing this arrangement serves neither my interests nor, I believe, those of my wife. The word wife fell from his lips like something distasteful, something to be quickly forgotten. Around them, the church had gone utterly silent except for the sound of the wind against the windows and someone's sharp intake of breath. Mr. Dawson, Gabriel's solicitor, emerged from where he had been standing near the back of the church. He carried a leather document case and wore an expression of profound discomfort as he approached Cordelia. "Your Grace," he said quietly, addressing Gabriel rather than her, despite the fact that she also held that title. "Perhaps this could wait for a more appropriate moment." "The appropriate moment," Gabriel replied with Arctic precision, "is when decisions are made and communicated clearly so that all parties understand their positions going forward." He nodded to the solicitor, who reluctantly opened the case and withdrew a set of papers. Cordelia recognized her husband's seal on the documents even from several feet away. "These are separation papers," Gabriel announced to the assembly as though he were reading the morning newspaper. "Mrs. Moreland will retain the use of Weston House, which now belongs to the Huntley estates as part of the marriage settlement. She will receive an annual allowance of £600, adequate for a gentlewoman living quietly in the country. All other assets and properties remain with the ducal holdings." £600. Her mother had brought $35,000 to this marriage, and she was being dismissed with £600 a year, and the house where she had grown up, now no longer truly hers but held at his pleasure. Lady Fairfield made a small sound of distress. Her husband placed a restraining hand on her arm, but his own face had darkened with anger. Around them, the mourners began to whisper again, but now the quality had changed. This was shock, outrage, and in some quarters, a cruel satisfaction at seeing someone brought low. Cordelia found her voice at last, though it emerged barely above a whisper. "You are doing this now? At my mother's funeral?" Gabriel's expression did not change. "I am doing this now because clarity serves everyone better than prolonged uncertainty. You will return to Weston House. I will return to Huntley Court. Mr. Dawson will handle the legal particulars. You need concern yourself with nothing beyond accepting these arrangements." "And if I do not accept?" The words came from somewhere deep inside her, from a part of herself she had not known still existed. For the first time, something flickered in Gabriel's eyes, surprise perhaps that she would question him at all. "You have no choice in the matter. The marriage settlement grants me control over all assets brought into the union. Your mother understood this when she signed the contracts. I am being more than generous in allowing you to remain at Weston House rather than establishing you in some lesser property." Generous. He considered this generosity. Cordelia looked around at the faces watching her humiliation. Some showed pity, others satisfaction, a few genuine distress. The vicar had gone pale and appeared to be praying silently. Lady Silverton whispered something to her daughter behind her fan. Mr. Hastings shook his head slowly, his mouth set in a grim line. This was what her life had become, a public spectacle, a cautionary tale. The merchant's daughter, who thought she could be a duchess and failed even at the most basic duty of a wife. "I understand," she said finally, because what else could she say? What power did she have to refuse anything he demanded? Gabriel nodded, as though she had simply agreed to a change in the dinner menu. "Mr. Dawson will call at Weston House within the week to ensure all arrangements are satisfactory. I trust you will find the terms acceptable upon reflection." He turned and walked out of the church without another word, his boots echoing on the stone floor with each measured step. The solicitor hesitated, looking at Cordelia with something that might have been sympathy, before following his employer out into the December cold. The remaining mourners began to disperse with unseemly haste, as though proximity to such a scandal might contaminate them. Only Lady Fairfield approached Cordelia, her kind face creased with concern. "My dear child," she said softly, taking Cordelia's cold hands in her own. "Come home with us tonight. You should not be alone at such a time." Cordelia shook her head. "Thank you, my lady, but I must return to Weston House. There are arrangements to be made regarding my mother's effects." What she meant was that she needed to be alone, needed to absorb what had just happened without anyone watching her fall apart. Lady Fairfield seemed to understand this, for she squeezed Cordelia's hands once more and then stepped back. "If you need anything at all," she said, "you know where to find us." Cordelia watched her leave and then found herself alone in the church except for the vicar, who was carefully extinguishing the candles that had burned during the service. He would not meet her eyes, she noticed. Even men of God apparently found it difficult to look at a woman who had been so publicly cast aside. She walked slowly down the aisle toward the door, passing the pew where she had sat as a child, where she had dreamed of futures that had nothing to do with dukes or bargains or the brutal arithmetic of marriage contracts. When she reached the door, she paused and looked back at her mother's coffin, still resting before the altar. "I am sorry, Mama," she whispered to the empty church. "I am sorry I could not make it work." The December wind seized her as she stepped outside, cutting through her black mourning dress with vicious efficiency. The funeral carriage that had brought her mother's body to the church had already departed. Gabriel's elaborate coach stood waiting near the gate, but she could not bear the thought of riding in it now, of sitting in the space that smelled of his cologne and his casual cruelty. Instead, she began to walk. Weston House lay 2 miles distant along country roads she had traveled countless times. Her half boots were not made for such a journey in winter weather, and her cloak provided inadequate protection against the biting cold. But these discomforts were welcome. They gave her something to feel beyond the numbness that had settled over her heart. The village of Fairford passed by in a blur of thatched roofs and curious faces peering from windows. News of what had happened in the church would spread by nightfall. By tomorrow, every household within 20 miles would know that the Duke of Huntley had discarded his wife at her mother's funeral because she had failed to produce an heir. The gossips would dine out on this for months. Cordelia mounted the gentle hill that led to Weston House, her breath pluming in white clouds that vanished quickly in the cold air. The house came into view through a stand of bare oak trees, looking smaller and shabbier than she remembered from her childhood. Of course, she had spent the last 3 years at Huntley Court, where even the servants' quarters were grander than this modest manor house. Her perspective had changed whether she wanted it to or not. Mrs. Fletcher, the elderly housekeeper who had served the Weston family for 40 years, opened the door before Cordelia could reach for the handle. Her lined face showed signs of recent tears, and she made no effort to hide them. "Oh, miss," she said, reverting to the form of address she had used when Cordelia was a child. "I heard what he did. The carter's boy came running with the news. That man should be horsewhipped for such behavior." Cordelia stepped into the familiar warmth of the entrance hall and allowed Mrs. Fletcher to help her remove her sodden cloak. "It is done, Mrs. Fletcher. There is no point in dwelling on it." "No point?" The housekeeper's voice rose with indignation. "He humiliated you in front of the whole parish on the very day you buried your poor mother. If Mr. Weston were alive, God rest his soul, he would have called the Duke out for such an insult." "If my father were alive," Cordelia said tiredly, "none of this would have happened. I would not have married the Duke. My mother would not have spent her last years worrying about money and security. Everything would have been different." She moved toward the stairs, wanting nothing more than to reach her old bedroom and lie down until the world stopped spinning. But Mrs. Fletcher caught her arm gently. "You should eat something, miss. You barely touched your food this morning." "I am not hungry." You need to keep your strength up. Grief is hard work, and you cannot fight it on an empty stomach." Cordelia wanted to argue, but the housekeeper's expression was so earnest, so full of motherly concern, that she found herself nodding instead. "Perhaps some tea and toast. In my room, if you do not mind." "Of course, miss. You go on up and get out of that damp dress. I will bring a tray shortly." Cordelia climbed the narrow stairs to the second floor, where her old bedroom waited exactly as she had left it 3 years ago. Her mother had kept it as a sort of shrine to her daughter's girlhood, leaving the embroidered cushions on the window seat and the watercolors on the walls untouched by time. She changed out of her morning dress with slow mechanical movements, hanging the damp garment carefully so it would not be ruined. A simple day dress of dark gray wool took its place, modest and unremarkable. No more Duchess's silks and satins, no more elaborate coiffures arranged by a lady's maid, just Cordelia Weston again, as though the last 3 years had been erased along with her marriage. The thought made her laugh, though the sound came out bitter and strange, erased. If only she could wake tomorrow and find that Gabriel Morland had been nothing but a particularly vivid nightmare. She pressed her lips together, her humiliation a hot coal in her breast. A quick rap came at the door, and Mrs. Fletcher entered carrying a tray laden with tea, toast, and a bowl of the cook's chicken broth. She set it on the small table by the window and then stood watching Cordelia with an expression that suggested she would not leave until her former charge had eaten something. Cordelia dutifully sat and lifted the teacup to her lips. The warmth felt good against her chilled hands, and after a moment, she discovered that she was actually quite hungry. She ate slowly, letting Mrs. Fletcher fuss over her in a way that Gabriel's servants at Huntley Court would never have dared. "That is better," the housekeeper said with satisfaction. "You are too thin, if you do not mind my saying so. Those 3 years with the Duke have not been kind to you." "They were not meant to be kind," Cordelia replied. "They were meant to be practical, a business arrangement, as His Grace so eloquently described it. A marriage should be more than business. Perhaps in novels and fairy stories. In the real world, marriages are often nothing more than contracts between families. I simply had the misfortune to be the commodity being traded." Mrs. Fletcher made a disapproving noise but did not argue further. Instead, she began tidying the already tidy room, straightening pillows and adjusting curtains while clearly working up the courage to say something more. "Out with it," Cordelia said finally. "I can see you have something on your mind." The housekeeper turned, her weathered hands twisting the corner of her apron. "It is just that everyone in the village is saying the Duke is cruel to cast you off for failing to give him an heir. But miss, forgive me for being indelicate. These things take time sometimes. 3 years is not so very long, and you are young yet. Perhaps if you had been given more time." Cordelia set down her teacup carefully. "The Duke has determined that 3 years is sufficient time to judge the success or failure of our union. His judgment is final. But surely there are things that can be done. Doctors, treatments. My sister's daughter tried for 5 years before conceiving, and now she has 3 healthy children." "Mrs. Fletcher," Cordelia said gently, "the Duke has made his decision. There will be no reconciliation, no second chances. I am to live here quietly and cause him no further inconvenience. That is the arrangement." The housekeeper's eyes filled with tears. "It is not right, miss. It is not right at all." "No," Cordelia agreed. "But righteousness has little to do with the realities of marriage among the aristocracy. I have learned that lesson thoroughly." Mrs. Fletcher left shortly after, taking the tray and her unspoken sympathies with her. Cordelia remained sitting by the window, watching the December afternoon fade into evening. Somewhere in the distance, the bells of St. Nicholas Church began to toll the hour, each note hanging in the cold air before dissipating into silence. She thought about the papers Mr. Dawson would bring, the legal dissolution of a marriage that had never been real in any meaningful sense. She thought about the £600 a year that would be her income, enough to live on, but not enough for any true independence. She thought about the rest of her life stretching ahead like an empty road leading nowhere in particular. And then, quite suddenly, and without any warning whatsoever, she leaned over and was violently sick into the chamber pot that Mrs. Fletcher kept discreetly behind a decorative screen. When the spasm passed, Cordelia sat back on her heels, breathing hard and trying to remember if she had eaten anything at breakfast that might have disagreed with her. But no, she had barely touched her food for days. Grief, she thought, grief and shock and exhaustion. Her body was simply protesting the impossible strain of the last week. She cleaned herself up with shaking hands and crawled into bed fully dressed, pulling the blankets up to her chin against the encroaching cold. Tomorrow, she would think about what came next. Tomorrow, she would begin the process of learning to be Cordelia Weston again, instead of the Duchess of Huntley. Tomorrow, she would figure out how to live the rest of her life as a cautionary tale. But tonight, she simply let herself cry until there were no more tears left, and the darkness outside her window matched the darkness in her heart. Yet even in the darkness, a kernel of defiant self-preservation took root, small and cold. The winter weeks crept by. January arrived with snow and bitter winds that kept Cordelia largely confined to Weston House. Mr. Dawson appeared on the second Tuesday of the month, carrying his leather case and his apologetic expression to finalize the separation arrangements. She signed the papers without reading them thoroughly, knowing it would make no difference. The law was clear on such matters. A husband controlled everything. A wife owned nothing. She could refuse to sign, of course, but then Gabriel could simply wait her out or pursue more forceful legal remedies. Better to accept the inevitable with whatever dignity she could muster. The first quarterly payment will be deposited with Coutts Bank in London, Mr. Dawson explained, carefully not meeting her eyes. You may draw upon it as needed for household expenses and personal requirements. His Grace has also agreed to continue the wages of your current servants. How generous, Cordelia murmured, thinking of the £35,000 her mother had surrendered for this marriage. The solicitor had the grace to look uncomfortable. Mrs. Morland, if I may speak candidly for a moment. By all means. His Grace is not a cruel man by nature. He is simply focused on certain obligations that he believes supersede all other considerations. The matter of an heir weighs heavily upon him. And the matter of a wife apparently weighs not at all, Cordelia replied. But I understand, Mr. Dawson. The Duke has his priorities, and I am not among them. You need not make excuses on his behalf. The solicitor gathered his papers and prepared to depart. At the door, he paused and looked back at her. For what it is worth, Mrs. Morland, I believe you conducted yourself with remarkable grace under trying circumstances. Not many women would have maintained such composure. After he left, Cordelia stood in the silent drawing room and wondered what composure was worth when measured against happiness. Not much, she suspected, but it was all she had left, so she would cling to it like a drowning woman clinging to driftwood. The nausea that had struck her on the day of her mother's funeral did not disappear. Instead, it became a regular morning companion, arriving with the dawn and departing by mid-morning. Cordelia attributed it to continued grief and the stress of her changed circumstances. Mrs. Fletcher offered various remedies, ginger tea and dry toast, but nothing seemed to help particularly. By late January, however, other symptoms had appeared. A strange tenderness in her breasts. An unusual fatigue that made even simple tasks exhausting. A heightened sensitivity to smells that had never bothered her before. And crucially, the cessation of her regular flow, which had always been somewhat irregular, but never this late. The possibility crept up on her slowly, like dawn breaking over a winter landscape. At first, she dismissed it as impossible. She and Gabriel had barely shared a bed in the months before her mother's death. His visits to her chamber had become increasingly infrequent as his frustration with her failure to conceive had grown. Surely it could not be that she had finally achieved the one thing he demanded at precisely the moment he had cast her aside. But by early February, she could no longer deny the evidence. She was almost certainly with child. The realization brought no joy, only a strange numbness. She sat in her mother's old sitting room, staring at the empty fireplace, and tried to decide what to do with this information. The obvious course would be to inform Gabriel immediately. A son would be his longed-for heir, a daughter valuable in her own right. He would be forced to acknowledge her again, perhaps even to resume the marriage. But even as she considered this, something inside her recoiled at the thought. He had discarded her publicly and brutally. He had reduced their marriage to a failed business transaction. He had humiliated her in front of everyone who had known her mother. And now, when his actions had finally borne the fruit he desired, she was supposed to run back to him like a grateful supplicant begging for recognition? No. The word formed in her mind with perfect clarity. No, she would not tell him. No, she would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her beg for acknowledgement. No, she would not allow him to claim this child as though he had any right to do so after what he had done. To reveal the pregnancy now would only guarantee he would seize the child as property and discard her utterly. This child was hers alone. She would raise it here at Weston House, away from the cold grandeur of Huntley Court and the disdainful aristocrats who had never truly accepted her. She would give her son or daughter the love and security she had known in her own childhood before money troubles and ducal marriages had changed everything. The decision, once made, brought a measure of peace, but it also brought practical concerns. She would need to see a physician to confirm the pregnancy and ensure her health. She would need to prepare the household for the addition of a child. And most importantly, she would need to maintain absolute secrecy about the child's parentage for as long as possible. Dr. Humphrey, who had attended the Weston family for 30 years, examined her in early February and confirmed what she already suspected. She was approximately 3 months with child, due to deliver sometime in late July or early August. "Does the Duke know?" he asked carefully as he helped her adjust her dress after the examination. "No," Cordelia replied, "and he will not know. I must ask for your complete discretion in this matter, Dr. Humphrey." The elderly physician frowned deeply. "Mrs. Morland, this is highly irregular. His Grace has a right to know that he has an heir coming." "His Grace surrendered any rights he might have had when he cast me aside at my mother's funeral," Cordelia said, with a firmness that surprised even herself. "This child is mine. I will not have him claim it as a possession to be added to his collection of estates and assets. But the law? I know what the law says. I also know what simple human decency suggests. And the Duke demonstrated very little of that when he announced our separation to half the county. I am asking you, as someone who has known me since I was born, to respect my wishes in this matter." "Doctor." Humphrey was silent for a long moment, clearly torn between his professional obligations and his personal sympathies. Finally, he sighed and nodded slowly. "Very well. I will keep your confidence. But Mrs. Morland, I must warn you that such secrets have a way of emerging at the most inconvenient times. You may wish to reconsider your decision before the child arrives." "I will bear that in mind," Cordelia said, though she had no intention of changing her position. The winter gave way to early spring with painful slowness. Cordelia's pregnancy progressed normally despite the lack of a husband's support or acknowledgement. Her body changed in ways both familiar and strange, swelling gradually with the new life growing inside her. She felt the first fluttering movements in April, like butterflies trapped against glass, and was surprised by the unyielding devotion that surged through her. This child, whoever he or she turned out to be, would never know the cold calculation that had characterized her marriage to Gabriel. This child would be loved simply for existing, not for what he could provide or what purpose he might serve. It was the only gift she could offer, but it felt like enough. Mrs. Fletcher and the other servants quickly guessed her condition, though they said nothing directly. They simply began treating her with increased gentleness, making sure she rested adequately and ate properly. The housekeeper seemed to have appointed herself guardian of Cordelia's health and the baby's well-being, and woe betide anyone who suggested otherwise. As her confinement approached, Cordelia made arrangements with Dr. Humphrey and a midwife from the village. She would give birth at Weston House, as women had been doing for generations, surrounded by people who cared for her rather than servants who viewed her as a duty. And through it all, she heard nothing from Gabriel. No letters arrived from Huntley Court. No messages were conveyed through Mr. Dawson. It was as though their 3 years of marriage had been completely erased, leaving no trace beyond the legal documents that granted her a pittance and the use of a house that would never truly be hers again. Cordelia told herself this was what she wanted. This silence, this distance, this complete separation from the man who had shown her so clearly that she meant nothing to him. She would not allow herself to look back. On the 2nd day of August, 1817, Cordelia went into labor. The pains began just after midnight, waking her from uneasy sleep with their insistent rhythm. Mrs. Fletcher sent for Dr. Humphrey and the midwife, and then settled in to see her former charge through the ordeal that lay ahead. The labor was long and difficult. Cordelia had no mother to guide her through the experience, no husband to pace anxiously in an adjoining room, no family to gather in support. There was only Mrs. Fletcher holding her hand, Dr. Humphrey monitoring her progress, and the midwife offering quiet encouragement as the hours dragged on. At 3:30 in the afternoon, as the August sun blazed through the windows of the bedroom where she had been born 24 years earlier, Cordelia delivered a healthy son. His first cry was strong and indignant, as though he were protesting the injustice of being forced from the warm comfort of the womb into the uncertain reality of the world. "A fine boy," the midwife announced with satisfaction, placing the squalling infant in Cordelia's arms. Strong lungs and all his parts in working order. Cordelia looked down at her son's red, wrinkled face and felt something shift inside her chest. This was love, then. Not the careful negotiation she had attempted with Gabriel, not the desperate hope that she could make him see her as more than a means to an end. This was love in its purest form, asking nothing, expecting nothing, simply pouring out in an endless stream toward this tiny person who had not asked to be born into such complicated circumstances. "Edward," she whispered, thinking of her father. "His name is Edward Weston." Mrs. Fletcher's eyes widened. "Not Moreland?" "No," Cordelia said firmly, meeting the housekeeper's gaze. "Not Moreland. He is mine, and he will bear my name." The physician and midwife exchanged glances, but said nothing. They helped Cordelia settle into a more comfortable position and then busied themselves with the practical matters that followed childbirth. Within an hour, she was cleaned and dressed in a fresh nightgown, the baby swaddled and sleeping peacefully in a cradle beside her bed. "You should rest, Doctor," Humphrey advised. "You have been through a great ordeal, and your body needs time to recover." "I will rest," Cordelia promised, though she found it difficult to take her eyes off the sleeping child. As the physician and midwife departed, Dr. Humphrey paused at the door and looked back at her with an expression of deep concern. "Mrs. Moreland," he said quietly, "I have documented the date of birth and approximate date of conception in my records. Should you ever need proof that this child was conceived during your marriage to His Grace, those documents exist and will be sworn to under oath if necessary." Cordelia nodded slowly, understanding what he was offering. An insurance policy. Evidence that could be produced if Gabriel ever tried to claim that the child was illegitimate or could not be his. A weapon to be used if circumstances required it. "Thank you, Dr. Humphrey," she said. "I hope such proof will never be needed, but I am grateful for your foresight." He left, and she was alone with her son and her thoughts. Outside the window, late afternoon was giving way to evening. In a few hours, it would be dark, and another day would end as unremarkably as it had begun. No one beyond these walls knew that the Duke of Huntley had gained an heir today. No one suspected that the child sleeping so peacefully in his cradle was the answer to 3 years of disappointed hopes. And no one, Cordelia vowed silently, would learn that truth until she chose to reveal it, if indeed she ever did. For now, Edward Weston would grow up loved and safe, far from the cold calculations and dynastic concerns that had poisoned his mother's marriage. That was enough. That had to be enough. The months following Edward's birth passed with the strange, timeless quality that characterizes life with an infant. Cordelia discovered reserves of strength she had not known she possessed, waking multiple times each night to nurse her son, learning to interpret his different cries, marveling at each tiny development. By December, Edward had grown from a wrinkled newborn into a healthy, alert baby with his father's dark hair and a disposition that seemed mercifully cheerful despite the circumstances of his birth. He was beginning to smile in response to voices and faces, and Cordelia found herself spending hours simply talking to him, telling him stories about his grandmother Dorothea and the merchant grandfather he would never know. Mrs. Fletcher doted on the child as though he were her own grandchild, and even the other servants found excuses to visit the nursery and admire young Master Edward. It was a peaceful existence, quiet and modest compared to the grand halls of Huntley Court, but filled with more genuine warmth than Cordelia had known during her entire marriage to Gabriel. She had almost succeeded in convincing herself that this was enough, that she could live out her days in comfortable obscurity, when Mrs. Fletcher appeared one morning in early December with news that shattered her carefully constructed peace. "There is talk in the village," the housekeeper announced without preamble as Cordelia finished nursing Edward. "The Duke is hosting a grand Christmas Eve ball at his London townhouse. The invitations went out last week." Cordelia felt her stomach tighten. "I fail to see how the Duke's social calendar concerns us." "He is announcing his engagement," Mrs. Fletcher continued, her voice heavy with significance, "to Lady Camilla Dunmore, daughter of the Duke of Westwick. She is 19 years old, miss, barely out of the schoolroom." The room seemed to tilt slightly. An engagement. Of course. Gabriel needed an heir, and she had failed to provide one. Now he was moving forward with a new wife, younger and presumably more fertile, who would give him the children that Cordelia could not. Except that she had. She had given him exactly what he wanted, only he did not know it. "Good for him," Cordelia said, hearing the brittleness in her own voice. "I hope Lady Camilla has better fortune than I did." "That is not all," Mrs. Fletcher said, and now there was anger threading through her words. "The servants at Huntley Court are saying His Grace is letting it be known that Lady Camilla comes from proven stock. Her 3 older sisters have all produced children within the first year of marriage. He implies that the failure to get an heir was entirely your fault." Cordelia closed her eyes, feeling the old humiliation wash over her fresh and sharp. Of course, Gabriel would frame it that way. The fault could never be his, never be a matter of timing or chance, or the simple biological reality that conception was not always immediate even in fertile couples. No, it had to be her inadequacy, her failure, her deficiency as a wife. Edward made a small sound from where he lay on her lap, and she looked down at his innocent face. This child, who existed because of a rare moment of intimacy in the final months before her mother's death, was the heir Gabriel had demanded. And he had no idea. A thought began to form in her mind, terrible and compelling in equal measure. What if Gabriel knew? What if he understood that he had cast aside his wife while she carried the very child he desired? What would that knowledge do to him? She would not let him proceed with a new marriage built on her ruin. "When is this ball?" she heard herself ask. Mrs. Fletcher blinked in surprise. "Christmas Eve, miss, at his townhouse in Mayfair. Why do you ask?" "No particular reason," Cordelia lied. "Merely curious." But the thought would not leave her. Over the following days, as she went about the familiar routines of caring for Edward, the idea grew and solidified into something resembling a plan. Gabriel had humiliated her publicly at her mother's funeral. He had announced their separation as though she were a failed business venture. He had told anyone who would listen that the fault for their childless marriage lay entirely with her. What if she gave him a taste of his own medicine? What if she appeared at his grand Christmas Eve ball in front of all the aristocratic society that had never truly accepted her, and presented him with evidence of the child he had unknowingly abandoned? The risk was enormous. She could be thrown out, laughed at, dismissed as a desperate woman seeking attention. But she would have the satisfaction of seeing his face when he realized what he had done. She would have the vindication of proving that the fault was not hers after all. She knew she could not bring Edward to London. The legal and social risks to his legitimacy were too great. The documents, instead, would serve her purpose better. She discussed the plan with no one, not even Mrs. Fletcher, who would surely have tried to talk her out of such a rash course of action. Instead, Cordelia quietly made her preparations. She arranged for Dr. Humphrey to prepare a sworn affidavit documenting Edward's birth and conception dates. She contacted the midwife who had attended the delivery and secured her written testimony as well. She gathered copies of the marriage settlement that showed her last month at Huntley Court, proving the timing made her pregnancy entirely possible. As Christmas approached, Cordelia faced the practical problem of what to wear to a duchess's ball when one possessed only the modest wardrobe of a gentlewoman living quietly in the country. Her mourning dresses were too severe, and the gowns she had worn as the Duchess of Huntley remained at Huntley Court, presumably disposed of or packed away by now. Mrs. Fletcher, when she finally learned of the plan, was predictably horrified. "You cannot possibly think of going to London alone and confronting His Grace at his engagement ball. The scandal would be enormous." "The scandal has already occurred," Cordelia replied calmly. "He made sure of that when he dissolved our marriage at my mother's funeral. I am simply providing a sequel to that particular performance." "But what do you hope to accomplish?" "He will be furious. He may refuse to acknowledge the child entirely. Then I will have proof of his refusal, witnessed by everyone who matters in society. And I will have the satisfaction of knowing that I forced him to confront what he threw away." In the end, Mrs. Fletcher helped her prepare, though the housekeeper made her disapproval clear at every stage. They found a seamstress in Cheltenham who could alter one of Cordelia's older gowns into something suitable for a formal ball. The dress was ivory silk with delicate embroidery, elegant if not fashionable, respectable if not impressive. It would have to do. On the morning of Christmas Eve, Cordelia arranged Edward's care in Mrs. Fletcher's capable hands and set out for London in a hired coach. The journey took most of the day, and she spent the hours reviewing her documents and rehearsing what she would say. She had no illusions about the reception she would receive, but she was determined to speak her piece regardless of the consequences. The coach reached London as dusk was falling, and Cordelia directed the driver to a modest inn near Piccadilly, where she could change into her ball gown and attend to her toilette for the ball. The innkeeper's wife helped her dress and arrange her hair in a simple but becoming style. At 8:30, Cordelia climbed into a hackney coach and gave the driver the address of Gabriel's townhouse in Mayfair. Number 24, Berkeley Square. She remembered it from her brief time as the Duchess of Huntley, though she had only visited once during the London season. Lights poured from the square when they arrived. Dozens of elegant carriages lined the street, depositing their glittering passengers at the steps of the townhouse. Women in jewels and men in evening dress streamed through the open doors into what appeared to be a fairy tale palace brought to life. Cordelia paid the hackney driver and stood for a moment on the pavement, watching the pageant of aristocratic society at play. These people had tolerated her presence as the Duke of Huntley's wife, but they had never forgotten her origins. She climbed the steps and entered the house. The entrance hall was magnificent, all marble and gilt, with chandeliers that cast brilliant light across the assembled guests. A liveried footman moved to intercept her, clearly intending to ask for her invitation. But she swept past him with the confidence of someone who had every right to be there. "Excuse me, madam," he called after her. but she was already moving toward the grand ballroom where music and laughter echoed. The ballroom was even more impressive than she remembered. The Christmas decorations transformed it into a winter wonderland, with garlands of evergreen and holly wreathing the columns, and what appeared to be actual snow falling from some cleverly designed mechanism near the ceiling. The effect was magical, romantic, utterly perfect for an engagement announcement. Cordelia stood at the edge of the crowd and searched for Gabriel. It did not take long. He was at the center of attention, as always, standing near a beautifully decorated Christmas tree with a young woman on his arm. Lady Camilla Dunmore was everything Cordelia was not. Blonde where she was dark, delicate where she was sturdy, aristocratic where she was common. The girl wore a gown of pale blue silk that must have cost more than Cordelia's annual allowance, and she looked up at Gabriel with an expression of mingled awe and nervousness. As Cordelia watched, Gabriel raised his glass, and the room gradually fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying easily across the space. "Thank you for joining us on this Christmas Eve to celebrate what I hope will be a joyous new beginning." This was it, the moment when he would announce his engagement, seal his future with this young girl who had no idea what kind of man she was agreeing to marry. Cordelia began moving through the crowd toward the Christmas tree. People turned to look at her, and she saw recognition dawning on various faces. Whispers started, spreading like ripples in a pond. "Is that not? It cannot be. What is she doing here?" "I am delighted to announce," Gabriel continued, oblivious to the disturbance at the back of the ballroom, "my engagement to Lady Camilla Dunmore, whose grace and charm have brought light back into my life after several dark years." Dark years. He meant their marriage. 3 years reduced to darkness. Cordelia reached the inner circle of guests surrounding Gabriel and Lady Camilla. Gabriel's eyes finally found hers, and the shock on his face would have been comical if the situation were not so desperately serious. Her jaw tightened, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her fear. "Cordelia," he said, and hearing her name from his lips after a year of silence was somehow more painful than anything that had come before. "What are you doing here?" The entire ballroom had gone silent now. 200 of England's most prominent citizens watched to see what would happen next. "I am here," Cordelia said clearly, "to deliver news that should have been yours to receive a year ago had you not been so hasty in dissolving our marriage." Lady Camilla looked confused. Her father, the Duke of Westwick, was beginning to look angry. Gabriel's face had gone pale. "This is neither the time nor the place," he said tightly. "If you have something to say to me, it can wait until a more appropriate moment." "As my separation was announced at my mother's funeral," Cordelia replied, "I thought a Christmas Eve ball was perfectly appropriate for announcing the existence of your son." The words fell into the silence like stones into still water. For a moment, no one moved. Then the whispers began again, louder now, shocked and titillated and utterly absorbed. "My what?" Gabriel's voice was barely above a whisper. Cordelia reached into her reticule and withdrew the documents she had so carefully assembled. "Your son, Edward Weston Moreland, born August 2nd, 1817. Conceived during the final weeks of our marriage, before you chose to publicly humiliate me at my mother's funeral." She held out the papers. Dr. Humphrey's affidavit, the midwife's testimony, the marriage settlement proving the timing. Gabriel stared at them as though they were written in a foreign language. "You are lying," he said finally. "You would have told me. You would have demanded recognition." "Why would I tell you?" Cordelia asked, and now the anger she had been suppressing for over a year finally broke free. "So you could claim him as property? So you could add him to your collection of estates and assets? You made it very clear what you thought of me, Your Grace. You announced to half of Gloucestershire that our marriage was a failed business transaction. You discarded me like defective merchandise. Why would I give you the satisfaction of knowing that your heir existed when you had shown such utter contempt for the mother who carried him?" Lady Camilla had begun to cry quietly. Her father was whispering urgently to Gabriel, clearly advising him to deny everything and have Cordelia removed. But Gabriel seemed frozen, staring at the documents in Cordelia's outstretched hand. "Let me see those," he said finally. Cordelia handed them over and watched as he read through them with increasing agitation. Dr. Humphrey's testimony was meticulous, including not just the date of birth, but detailed medical observations about the baby's development that confirmed the conception timeline. The midwife's statement corroborated every detail, and the marriage settlement showed conclusively that Cordelia had still been living at Huntley Court during the period when the child must have been conceived. "This is impossible," Gabriel said, but his voice lacked conviction. The timing is exact," Cordelia said. "Your heir was conceived in late October or early November of 1816. He was born August 2nd, 1817. If you doubt my word, Dr. Humphrey is prepared to testify under oath to these facts. The midwife who delivered him will do the same. You have a son, Your Grace. You have had one for 4 months now. You simply did not know because you were too busy casting off his mother to bother checking whether she might be carrying the child you claim to want so desperately." The Duke of Westwick stepped forward, his face red with anger. "This is outrageous. My daughter has been made to look like a fool. If there is truly a child, which I doubt, then Your Grace should have been informed immediately. This woman has no business disrupting an engagement celebration with wild claims and questionable documents." "The documents are not dubious," a new voice interjected. Cordelia turned to see an elderly gentleman in physician's attire pushing through the crowd. "I am Dr. Humphrey of Fairford, and I stand by every word of my testimony. The child exists. He is healthy and legitimate, and he was indeed conceived during the marriage between His Grace and Mrs. Morland." The ballroom erupted in chaos. Some guests were scandalized, others fascinated, still others clearly trying to calculate the social implications of this revelation. Lady Camilla fled the room in tears, followed by her mother and several sympathetic friends. The Duke of Westwick stood toe-to-toe with Gabriel, demanding explanations and threatening lawsuits. Through it all, Gabriel simply stared at Cordelia with an expression she could not read. Shock, certainly. Anger, possibly. But beneath those surface emotions, something else flickered. Confusion? Regret? It was impossible to tell. Finally, Gabriel raised his hand and the room gradually quieted. "Everyone, please," he said, his voice strained. "This is clearly a private matter that should not be discussed in such a public forum. I ask that you all respect the delicacy of the situation and allow me time to investigate these claims." "There is nothing to investigate," Cordelia said. "The facts are clear. You have a son. What you choose to do with that information is entirely your decision. I have fulfilled my obligation by informing you of his existence. I shall not sue for recognition or support. Edward and I have managed quite well without you for 4 months, and we will continue to do so if necessary." She turned to leave, her purpose accomplished, but Gabriel's voice stopped her. "Wait," she looked back at him. This man she had married with such foolish hopes, this stranger who wore her husband's face but had never shown her anything resembling kindness or warmth. "Where is he?" Gabriel asked quietly. "Where is the child?" "Safe," Cordelia replied. "And loved. Which is more than he would be if I had told you about him immediately and subjected him to whatever cold arrangement you would have devised. I have a right to see him." "You have a right to nothing," Cordelia said with sudden fierceness. "You surrendered any rights you might have claimed when you announced our separation at my mother's funeral. If you wish to establish a relationship with Edward, you will do so on my terms, not yours. And the first term is that you prove yourself capable of treating his mother with basic human decency." With that, she walked out of the ballroom, through the entrance hall and into the cold December night. Behind her, she could hear the roar of conversation as 200 members of the aristocracy tried to make sense of what had just happened. Cordelia made her way back to the inn where she had left her traveling clothes. She changed quickly, paid her bill, and hired a coach to take her back to Gloucestershire that very night. She had no desire to remain in London any longer than necessary. As the coach rattled through the dark streets and out into the countryside, Cordelia allowed herself to feel the full weight of what she had done. She had exposed Gabriel's cruelty in the most public way possible. She had destroyed his engagement to Lady Camilla. She had created a scandal that would be discussed in drawing rooms across England for months to come, and she had no idea what would happen next. But as dawn broke over the Cotswolds and Weston House came into view, Cordelia felt a strange sense of peace. She had told the truth. She had defended herself and her son. She had refused to be silent about her treatment. Whatever consequences followed would be faced with the same dignity she had maintained throughout the entire ordeal. Mrs. Fletcher met her at the door with Edward in her arms, and Cordelia took her son and held him close, breathing in the sweet baby scent of him. "It is done," she told the housekeeper. "He knows. And what will he do with that knowledge?" "I have no idea," Cordelia admitted, "but at least now he cannot claim ignorance. He cannot tell the world that I failed to give him an heir when he knows perfectly well that Edward exists." Edward chose that moment to wake and regard his mother with solemn dark eyes. Cordelia smiled at him, feeling the unyielding devotion that had sustained her through the past year well up fresh and strong. "Whatever happens," she whispered to her son, "you will always be loved. That is my promise to you." And for now, in the quiet sanctuary of Weston House, that promise felt like enough. The aftermath of the Christmas Eve revelation played out exactly as Cordelia had anticipated, and yet more chaotically than she could have imagined. Within days, the scandal had spread across England like wildfire in summer drought. Every drawing room in London buzzed with speculation and gossip. Some took Gabriel's side, arguing that any reasonable man would assume his separated wife would inform him of a pregnancy. Others championed Cordelia, pointing out that Gabriel's public humiliation of her at her mother's funeral had forfeited any right to courtesy or consideration. The Westwick family was reportedly furious, though Lady Camilla had quietly retreated to the country rather than face the pitying looks of society. Cordelia received a steady stream of visitors at Weston House, most of them neighbors who were either genuinely concerned or merely curious about the scandal. She received them with the same gracious composure she had maintained throughout, answering questions when appropriate and deflecting them when not. 3 days after Christmas, Mr. Dawson appeared at her door with another leather case full of documents. Cordelia received him in the drawing room, with Edward sleeping peacefully in a cradle by the fireplace. "Mrs. Morland," the solicitor began, then paused and corrected himself. "Your Grace, I should say. Legally, you remain the Duchess of Huntly." "Mrs. Morland will suffice," Cordelia replied. "What brings you here, Mr. Dawson?" "His Grace has instructed me to begin legal proceedings to establish custody of the child." He said this quickly, as though getting the words out fast might make them less painful. He believes, as the father and as a duke, that he has the superior claim to raise his son and heir. Cordelia had expected this. The law was brutally clear on the matter of children. Fathers owned them in every legal sense. A mother had no rights whatsoever if the father chose to claim custody. "I see," she said calmly. "And what does His Grace propose for Edward's upbringing? Will he be raised by nursemaids and tutors while his father pursues his aristocratic entertainments? Will he grow up learning that people are assets to be managed and discarded when they fail to meet expectations?" Mr. Dawson looked profoundly uncomfortable. "His Grace has assured me that the boy will receive every advantage appropriate to his station. The finest education, the best tutors, training in estate management, and the responsibilities of a duke." Everything except love, Cordelia said softly. Everything except the knowledge that he is valued for himself rather than for what he represents. Mrs. Moreland, I understand your concerns, but the law is quite clear on this matter. His Grace has every right to— The law, Cordelia interrupted, gave His Grace the right to discard me at my mother's funeral without warning or cause beyond my failure to produce a child quickly enough. The law allowed him to reduce our marriage to a business transaction and dissolve it as casually as one might terminate a contract with a tradesman. Forgive me if I do not have tremendous faith in what the law permits His Grace to do. Mr. Dawson sighed heavily. I have known you since you were a child, Mrs. Moreland. I attended your christening in this very parish. I do not enjoy being the instrument of your further distress. Then advise your employer to reconsider his actions, Cordelia suggested. Advise him that perhaps a man who treated his wife with such contempt should be very cautious about demanding custody of the child that wife bore him. I have advised him of exactly that, the solicitor admitted. He is not in a receptive mood for such counsel at present. Cordelia pressed her lips together, then settled her gaze on the sleeping infant. Gabriel had the law on his side, the power of his position, and the resources to pursue any legal remedy he chose. She had only her determination and the unyielding devotion she felt for her son. It would have to be enough. The solution came from an unexpected quarter. Lady Rutherford, Gabriel's elderly aunt, arrived at Weston House on a bitter January morning. She was a formidable woman in her 70s, known for her liberal opinions and her willingness to speak her mind regardless of the consequences. "Show me the child," she demanded as soon as the courtesies were dispensed with. Cordelia brought Edward to the drawing room, where Lady Rutherford subjected him to a thorough examination. She checked his eyes, his reflexes, his general health with the confidence of someone who had raised 6 children of her own. "He is a Moreland," she pronounced finally. "No question about it. He has the family nose and the set of the eyes. Gabriel would be a fool to deny paternity." "He has not denied it," Cordelia said carefully. "He has simply decided to claim custody through legal means rather than acknowledging any obligations to the child's mother." Lady Rutherford's expression hardened. "That boy has been an idiot since the day he inherited the title. Too much responsibility too young, and no one to guide him properly. His father's death left him desperate to save the estates, and desperation makes men cruel. That does not excuse his behavior." "No," the elderly woman agreed. "It does not, which is why I am here. I am going to speak to my nephew, and I am going to make him understand exactly how foolish he is being. With respect, my lady, I doubt he will listen to anyone at this point." Lady Rutherford smiled grimly. "He will listen to me. I may be old, but I control the family trust that supports several of his maiden cousins. If he wishes that income to continue flowing, he will give me a hearing. And what he will hear is that he is behaving like a tyrant and a fool, and that if he continues down this path, he will destroy what little chance he has of ever having a real relationship with his son." True to her word, Lady Rutherford departed for Huntley Court immediately after her visit to Weston House. Cordelia heard nothing for 3 weeks, during which time she lived in a state of constant anxiety, expecting at any moment to receive notice that legal proceedings had begun to take Edward from her. Then, in early February, Gabriel himself appeared at Weston House. Cordelia received him in the drawing room with her heart pounding. He looked different somehow. Older, perhaps, or merely more tired. The aristocratic arrogance that had characterized his every movement seemed muted, replaced by something that might have been uncertainty. "Mrs. Moreland," he said, and there was none of the cold formality in his voice that had marked their previous interactions. "Thank you for seeing me." "Did I have a choice?" she asked. "This is your house, after all. You could demand entrance whether I wished it or not." He winced slightly. "It is your home. I should have made that clear in the separation papers. The house is yours for your lifetime, not merely by my sufferance." Cordelia said nothing, waiting to see what had prompted this unexpected visit. Gabriel crossed to the window and stood looking out at the winter garden. My aunt has spent the better part of 3 weeks explaining to me in excruciating detail exactly what kind of man I have become. She's been quite eloquent on the subject of my failures, both as a husband and as a potential father. Lady Rutherford has always been known for her plain speaking. She told me that I valued title above humanity, contracts above connection, and dynastic duty above every decent impulse. He turned to face her, and Cordelia was startled to see genuine emotion in his expression. She was correct on all counts. "Gabriel, please, let me finish." He took a breath. "I married you because I needed money to save the estates. That is the unvarnished truth, and I will not insult you by pretending otherwise. But you deserved better than the cold arrangement I forced upon you. You deserved kindness, if not affection, respect, if not love. And instead, I treated you with disdain because you reminded me daily that I had been forced to compromise the standards I was raised to believe were inviolable." And Cordelia felt tears sting her eyes but refused to let them fall. "You married a merchant's daughter and could never forgive me for not being born an aristocrat." "I married a woman of grace and dignity," Gabriel corrected quietly. "And I spent 3 years failing to recognize those qualities because I was too focused on what I had lost rather than what I had gained. Then, when you did not immediately produce an heir, I blamed you for what was as much my failure as yours. And when your mother died and I saw you grieving, all I could think about was my own disappointment and frustration. So I did the cruelest thing I have ever done in my life. I cast you aside publicly, in front of everyone who mattered to you, at the moment when you most needed support." "Why are you telling me this now?" Cordelia asked. "What has changed?" "I have a son," Gabriel said simply. "A son I did not know existed because I was too proud and too foolish to treat his mother with basic human decency. For 4 months, he has been growing and developing without my knowledge. For 4 months, you have been raising him alone because I made it clear that you meant nothing to me." He moved closer, and Cordelia saw something in his eyes she had never seen during their marriage. Vulnerability, genuine emotion, something that looked almost like grief. "My aunt asked me a question that I could not answer," he continued. "She asked me what kind of man seeks custody of a child, not because he loves him, but because he represents dynastic continuity. She asked me what I would teach my son about women, about family, about the meaning of marriage, when my own example has been one of callous self-interest. And I had no answer because she was right. I am not worthy of the name of father at this moment. I have proven myself to be exactly the kind of father who would damage him." "Then what do you want?" Cordelia asked, confused by this unexpected humility. "I want permission to try to become a better man," Gabriel replied. "Not for dynastic reasons, not because the law gives me rights over my son, but because I have spent the past 6 weeks realizing that I have wasted years pursuing things that do not actually matter while destroying the few things that do." He reached into his coat and withdrew a document. "I have had Mr. Dawson draw up a new settlement. Edward will have a trust fund completely independent of the ducal estates, guaranteeing his security regardless of what happens between us. You will have full legal guardianship, which is unprecedented but which I insisted be included. The annual allowance for your support will be increased to £5,000, and Weston House will be transferred to your name outright." Cordelia stared at the document he held out to her. "Why?" "Because actions speak louder than words," Gabriel said. "Because I can tell you all day that I regret what I did, but unless I demonstrate that regret through concrete changes, they are just words. And because my son deserves a mother who is free and secure, not dependent on the whims of a man who has proven himself unworthy of trust. You are giving up your legal rights to Edward?" "I am establishing a relationship based on mutual agreement rather than legal compulsion," Gabriel corrected. "I am asking, not demanding. I am recognizing that you have every reason to deny me access to my son, and that any relationship I have with him must be earned through consistent demonstration that I have changed." Cordelia sat down slowly, trying to process this unexpected turn of events. The Gabriel standing before her bore little resemblance to the cold, arrogant man who had married her 3 years ago. This man seemed genuinely remorseful. This man seemed to understand what he had done wrong. "How do I know this is not simply another strategy?" she asked. "How do I know you will not wait until I lower my guard and then seize custody through legal means?" "You do not know," Gabriel admitted. "Trust must be earned over time. I cannot give you guarantees beyond the legal documents that constrain my own power. But I can give you my word that I will not pursue custody through the courts, and I can give you time to observe whether my actions match my stated intentions." He set the document on the table between them. "Read it carefully. Have a solicitor review it if you wish. There are no hidden clauses, no traps. It says exactly what I told you it says. And if you choose to reject it, if you choose to deny me any contact with Edward, I will accept that decision." "Why this change of heart?" Cordelia asked. "What happened to the man who announced our separation at my mother's funeral?" Gabriel clenched his jaw, a muscle visibly twitching with what looked like shame. "That man still exists inside me. I would be lying if I claimed otherwise. But my aunt's words forced me to look at myself clearly for the first time in years. And I did not like what I saw, a duke obsessed with duty but ignorant of honor. I was a husband who treated his wife as a means to an end, and then discarded her when she failed to serve that end quickly enough." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "On Christmas Eve, when you walked into that ballroom and revealed that I had a son I knew nothing about, my first emotion was rage. How dare you keep this from me? How dare you embarrass me in front of everyone who mattered?" It was only later, after Lady Camilla's family had departed and the guests had scattered, and I was alone with the wreckage of my carefully planned future, that I began to understand. You kept Edward's existence from me for the same reason anyone would hide something precious from someone who has proven themselves untrustworthy. You were protecting him. From me. "Yes," Cordelia said simply, because there was no point in denying it. "A man who needs to be protected from his own child," Gabriel continued, "is a man who has fundamentally failed at the most basic requirements of humanity." That realization was devastating and necessary. He moved toward the door, clearly intending to leave. "I will not press you for an answer today. Take whatever time you need to review the documents and consider my request. If you decide that I should have no contact with Edward, I will accept that decision and trouble you no further." "Gabriel," Cordelia called as he reached the door. He turned back, and she saw hope flicker across his face. "May I ask you one question?" "Of course." "If I had not appeared at the Christmas Eve ball, if I had kept Edward's existence secret forever, would you ever have realized what you did wrong? Or would you have married Lady Camilla and lived your life believing that I was the failure in our marriage?" He was silent for a long moment. "I do not know," he said finally. "I would like to think that eventually my conscience would have troubled me. But honestly, I might have spent the rest of my life believing exactly what I told everyone. That you were inadequate, that the fault was entirely yours, that I was justified in casting you aside. The fact that I required such a dramatic confrontation to see the truth is itself a damning indictment of my character." "At least you can admit it," Cordelia said. After Gabriel left, Cordelia spent the rest of the day reading through the legal documents he had provided. Everything was exactly as he had described it. The trust fund for Edward was substantial and completely independent. The guardianship clause gave her sole legal authority over all decisions regarding the child's upbringing. The increased allowance and property transfer were equally generous. Either this was an elaborate long-term strategy to win her trust before asserting control, or Gabriel was genuinely trying to make amends for his previous behavior. Time would tell which interpretation was correct. Over the following weeks, Gabriel began visiting Weston House regularly, not daily, which would have been overwhelming, but 3 or 4 times a week. He came in the afternoons and stayed for an hour or two, sitting in the nursery and watching Edward with an expression of mingled wonder and regret. At first, he barely spoke to Cordelia beyond basic courtesies. He seemed content to simply be in Edward's presence, observing the child's development, asking occasional questions about feeding schedules and sleep patterns. Cordelia watched him carefully, looking for signs that this was merely an act, but his genuine fascination with the baby seemed impossible to fake. In March, Edward smiled for the first time, a gummy grin that transformed his small face. Gabriel happened to be present for this milestone, and Cordelia saw tears spring to his eyes as he watched his son's first deliberate expression of happiness. "I nearly missed this," he said quietly. "If you had not confronted me at the ball, I would have married Lady Camilla and moved forward with my life, and I would never have known that this child existed. I would have missed everything important while pursuing things that do not matter at all." By April, Gabriel had begun speaking more freely during his visits. He told Cordelia about the pressure he had felt when he inherited the dukedom at 25, about the crushing weight of responsibility and debt. He explained how his father's gambling had nearly destroyed the family's fortune, and how his mother had died heartbroken over the decline of the estates she had loved. He described the desperation that had driven him to accept a marriage with a merchant's daughter, and the shame he had felt at compromising the aristocratic standards he had been raised to consider sacred. "I am not offering these as excuses," he said during one afternoon conversation, while Edward slept peacefully in his cradle. "I am simply trying to help you understand the man you married. He was drowning in obligations he did not know how to meet, and he made choices that sacrificed human decency for practical necessity." "And the man you are now?" Cordelia asked. "Is he different from that drowning boy who became a duke too young?" Gabriel considered this carefully. "I would like to think he is learning to be different, learning to value people over property, relationships over duty, love over dynastic continuity. But transformation is not instantaneous. I still feel the pull of old patterns, old assumptions. The difference is that now I question them rather than accepting them as unchangeable truth." Sunlight warmed the glass of the window in May, and Easter arrived. Gabriel invited Cordelia and Edward to attend Easter service at St. Mary Church in Fairford, the same church where Cordelia had been baptized as an infant. She agreed, curious to see how the village would react to the Duke of Huntley appearing with the wife and child he had so publicly discarded. The reaction was mixed. Some parishioners greeted them warmly, clearly pleased to see the family together. Others maintained a cool distance, reserving judgment on whether Gabriel's apparent reformation was genuine. A few, mostly elderly women who had known Cordelia since childhood, gave the Duke looks that could have curdled milk. After the service, as the congregation gathered in the churchyard to enjoy the spring weather, Gabriel did something that stunned everyone present. He stood before the assembled villagers and spoke clearly enough for all to hear. "I wish to publicly acknowledge my failures as a husband and as a man," he announced. "A year ago December, I committed an act of profound cruelty against my wife. I dissolved our marriage at her mother's funeral, citing her failure to provide an heir as justification. I treated her as a failed business investment rather than as a human being deserving of respect and dignity. I was wrong, completely and irredeemably wrong. And I wish to apologize not only to Mrs. Moreland, but to this entire community that witnessed my disgraceful behavior." The churchyard had gone utterly silent. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. Gabriel turned to Cordelia, and she saw that his hands were trembling slightly. "Cordelia, I know that words cannot undo what I did. But I want you to know that I have spent every day since Christmas Eve trying to become the kind of man who deserves your forgiveness. I do not ask that you trust me immediately. Trust must be earned. But I am asking for the opportunity to earn it, however long that process might take. Cordelia felt every eye in the churchyard upon her, waiting to see how she would respond. She looked at Gabriel, this man who had hurt her so deeply, who was now humbling himself in front of the entire village. And she thought about the past 4 months, about the consistent effort he had made to be present in Edward's life, about the legal documents that protected her and her son from his own power. "I accept your apology," she said quietly. "Not because it erases what happened, but because I believe in the possibility of change. For Edward's sake, if nothing else, I am willing to see if you can become the father he deserves." Gabriel's relief was visible. He nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Around them, the villagers began murmuring again, some approving, others skeptical, but all clearly fascinated by this dramatic development in a scandal that had entertained them for months. As they walked back to Weston House after the service, Edward nestled in Cordelia's arms. Gabriel spoke hesitantly. "I know this is premature," he said. "I know I have not earned the right to ask. But Cordelia, is there any possibility that someday you might consider allowing me back into your life, not just as Edward's father, but as your husband?" Cordelia stopped walking and looked at him carefully. "Are you proposing to me?" "Not yet," Gabriel replied quickly. "I am simply asking if such a thing might be possible in the future. If I continue to demonstrate through actions that I have changed, if I prove myself trustworthy over time, might you consider giving me a second chance at being the husband I should have been from the beginning?" "I do not know," Cordelia answered honestly. "The man you were caused me tremendous pain. The man you claim to be becoming seems different, but I need more than 4 months to judge whether that change is real or merely temporary reform driven by social pressure." "That is fair," Gabriel said. "More than fair. I will continue to prove myself, and you will continue to observe. And perhaps, in time, you will find that the change is genuine." They walked on in silence, and Cordelia found herself thinking about the future for the first time in months. What would it mean to remarry Gabriel? Would she be walking back into the same trap that had caused her such misery, or would they be building something new and different based on mutual respect rather than financial necessity? The answer, she realized, depended entirely on whether Gabriel's transformation was real, and only time would reveal that truth. The summer passed in a pattern of visits, conversations, and gradual healing. Gabriel came to Weston House 3 or 4 times each week, spending time with Edward and talking with Cordelia about everything from estate management to literature to the changing political landscape. He was careful never to pressure her, never to assume privileges he had not earned, never to treat her as anything other than an equal partner in decisions about their son's upbringing. In June, Edward laughed for the first time, a delightful gurgling sound that made both his parents smile. Gabriel was present for this milestone too, and Cordelia found herself grateful that her son would have memories of his father being there for these important moments. By August, Edward's first birthday approached. Cordelia planned a small celebration at Weston House, inviting Lady Fairfield and her family, Dr. Humphrey, and a few other close friends. Gabriel attended, of course, and brought an elaborate wooden rocking horse that Edward was still far too young to use, but that would wait in the nursery for when he was ready. As Cordelia watched Gabriel lift their son into his arms and walk around the garden showing him flowers and butterflies, she felt something shift inside her chest. This man, this Gabriel who was patient and gentle and genuinely interested in his child's development, bore little resemblance to the cold aristocrat she had married. Perhaps change was possible after all. Perhaps people could learn from their mistakes and become better versions of themselves. In September, as autumn began to paint the countryside in shades of gold and amber, Gabriel asked if he might take Edward for a walk in the village. Cordelia hesitated, then realized that her hesitation was born of old fears rather than current reality. Gabriel had spent 9 months proving his commitment. 9 months of consistent, patient effort to build a relationship with his son. 9 months of treating Cordelia with the respect she should have received from the beginning. "Yes," she said, "but I will come with you." They walked through Fairford together, the three of them, and Cordelia noticed how the villagers' attitudes had shifted. Where once there had been pity or judgment, now there was cautious approval. The Duke of Huntley, it seemed, was redeeming himself in the eyes of the community. At the Harvest Festival in late September, Gabriel publicly advocated for reforms to the marriage laws that would give women greater control over their own settled property. He spoke passionately about the need for married women to retain some control over their own property, citing his own marriage as an example of how the current system allowed men to abuse their power. "My wife brought a substantial fortune to our marriage," he told the assembled landowners and magistrates. "Under current law, I had absolute control over every penny. I could have squandered it on gambling or foolish investments, and she would have had no recourse whatsoever. That is not justice. That is not protection for women. That is legalized robbery disguised as marriage settlement." His words caused considerable controversy, as they were meant to. But Cordelia recognized the gesture for what it was, another demonstration that Gabriel was serious about changing not just his own behavior, but the social structures that had enabled his cruelty. October arrived with crisp air and the annual harvest celebrations. Edward had learned to pull himself up on furniture and was attempting his first wobbly steps while holding onto someone's hands. Gabriel spent hours encouraging these efforts, walking slowly across the nursery while Edward gripped his index fingers and tottered forward with intense concentration. "He has your determination," Gabriel observed one afternoon as Edward refused to give up despite multiple tumbles. "That stubborn insistence on achieving what he sets his mind to. I hope he also inherits your better qualities," Cordelia replied. "The ones you have been developing over the past 10 months. Gabriel looked at her with an expression that made her heart beat faster. "Cordelia, I know I said I would not pressure you, but Christmas Eve will mark 1 year since you confronted me at the engagement ball. 1 year since you forced me to see what kind of man I had become. Would you consider allowing me to ask you properly what I should have asked a year ago? What question is that? Whether you might marry me again, not because we are legally bound, not because of financial necessity, but because we have built something real during these months of second chances." Cordelia sat down slowly, her mind racing. A year ago, she would have laughed bitterly at the suggestion that she might ever willingly resume her marriage to Gabriel. But now, after 10 months of consistent effort on his part, after watching him transform from a cold aristocrat into a father who genuinely loved his son, after experiencing the respect and consideration he had shown her, the question did not seem absurd. "I need more time," she said finally. "Not because I doubt your sincerity, but because remarriage is a serious decision. If we do this, I want to be absolutely certain that we are building a partnership based on mutual respect and affection, not just on duty to Edward." "How much more time do you need?" "Until Christmas Eve," Cordelia replied. "Ask me then. Exactly 1 year after everything changed. If I say yes, we will remarry in the new year. If I say no, we will continue as we are, as parents who work together for our son's benefit." Gabriel nodded slowly. "That is more than fair. And Cordelia, whatever you decide, I will respect it. You have my word on that." The weeks leading up to Christmas passed with the grinding pace of an expectant clock. Cordelia found herself thinking constantly about Gabriel's question. Did she love him? That was impossible to answer. She had never loved the man she married 3 years ago. But this new Gabriel, this man who wrote her thoughtful letters and brought presents for Edward and publicly advocated for women's rights, this man she found herself caring for in ways that surprised her. Was it love? Perhaps not yet. But it might become love given time and continued effort. And sometimes, Cordelia thought, that practical foundation was stronger than the passionate infatuation she had once imagined marriage should be based on. On Christmas morning, Cordelia dressed carefully in a gown of deep green velvet and allowed Mrs. Fletcher to arrange her hair in an elaborate style. Edward, now 16 months old, was dressed in a miniature suit that made him look the young gentleman he was. He had begun speaking in simple words and seemed to understand that today was special, though he could not have said why. Gabriel arrived at mid-morning, carrying gifts wrapped in elegant paper. But before he distributed them, he knelt down in front of Cordelia with a small velvet box in his hand. "A year ago today," he began, "you appeared at my engagement ball and showed me the truth about myself. You gave me the gift of knowing I had a son, but more importantly, you gave me the opportunity to become a better man. I do not know if I have succeeded in that transformation. Only you can judge that. But I know that I am not the same person who married you 3 years ago. And I am asking you now, not as a duke demanding duty, but as a man who has learned the value of what he nearly destroyed, will you marry me again? Will you give me the chance to be the husband I should have been from the beginning?" He opened the box to reveal a ring set with emeralds and diamonds, beautiful but not ostentatious. "This was my grandmother's ring. She was known for her kindness and her strength, qualities that remind me of you. I would be honored if you would wear it." Cordelia took a steadying breath, looked at Gabriel kneeling before her, at the hope and vulnerability in his expression, at the ring that represented not a business transaction, but a genuine offer of partnership. She looked at Edward playing with his wooden horse nearby, oblivious to the significance of the moment. And she thought about the past year, about the consistent effort Gabriel had made to prove himself worthy of a second chance. She knew she was not merely accepting a husband. She was choosing to build a new life with a man who had earned the right to stand beside her. "Yes," she said finally, "I will marry you again, but on one condition. Anything. We remarry here, in St. Mary Church in Fairford. The same church where my mother attended services, where I was baptized, where you publicly apologized for your treatment of me. I want our second marriage to be witnessed by the community that saw both my humiliation and your redemption." Gabriel slipped the ring onto her finger and then stood, pulling her into an embrace that felt entirely different from the cold formality of their first wedding. "We will marry wherever you wish. And Cordelia, I promise you, this marriage will be nothing like the first. I will spend the rest of my life proving that to you." They were remarried on a cold January morning in 1819, with half of Fairford in attendance. Lady Rutherford served as matron of honor, wiping away tears throughout the ceremony. Edward, held by Mrs. Fletcher, seemed to sense the importance of the occasion and remained unusually quiet. When the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, Gabriel kissed Cordelia with a tenderness that made several ladies in the congregation sigh. This was not a dynastic alliance or a business transaction. This was two people who had found their way back to each other through adversity and hard-won wisdom. The wedding breakfast at Weston House was a joyous affair. Gabriel had arranged for musicians from London to perform, and the modest manor house overflowed with guests celebrating not just a marriage, but a genuine reformation of character. As evening fell and the guests began to depart, Gabriel drew Cordelia aside into the garden where they could speak privately. "I have one more gift for you," he said, producing another legal document. "I have permanently renounced any legal control over your inheritance from your mother. The funds that came into the marriage settlement will be returned to your sole ownership together with all accrued profits. You will never again be dependent on my goodwill or subject to my control. Gabriel, you have already given me so much. I need you to know that you stay with me by choice, not by necessity," he interrupted gently. "I need to know that if I ever behave in ways that make you unhappy, you have the means to leave. The imbalance of authority in our first marriage was corrupting. This time, we enter as equals." Cordelia took the document and looked at the man she had just remarried. "You have changed so much." "I had the best possible motivation," Gabriel replied. "A son I nearly never knew, and a wife whose strength shamed me into becoming better." They went back inside, where Edward had fallen asleep in Lady Rutherford's arms. Gabriel lifted his son carefully and carried him up to the nursery, with Cordelia following close behind. As they stood together watching their child sleep, Gabriel spoke softly. "Thank you for giving me another chance. I will not waste it." "Thank you for being willing to change," Cordelia replied. Not everyone has that courage. The years that followed brought the happiness that had been missing from their first marriage. A daughter, Victoria, was born in October of 1819. Gabriel was present for the birth, holding Cordelia's hand through the difficult hours and weeping when he first held his daughter. The family divided their time between Weston House and Huntley Court, with both properties maintained as true homes rather than mere assets. Gabriel established a charitable foundation in honor of Dorothea Weston, helping merchant families facing financial difficulty. Cordelia opened a school for girls in Fairford, providing education that went beyond the traditional accomplishments and prepared young women for lives of substance and purpose. Each Christmas Eve, Gabriel and Cordelia renewed their vows privately in St. Mary Church, a ritual that reminded them both of how far they had traveled from the dark days of their first marriage. Edward and Victoria, as they grew, would witness these renewals and understand that their parents' love had been hard-won and carefully tended. On Christmas Eve of 1820, as the family gathered in Huntley Court for their holiday celebrations, Edward, now 3 years old, insisted on singing carols with his father. Gabriel lifted the boy in his arms and carried him to the grand piano in the music room, where they sang together in voices that blended surprisingly well. Cordelia stood in the doorway, holding baby Victoria and watching her husband and son with the quiet peace of a soul long denied solace. This was the life she had once foolishly hoped for when she married Gabriel 4 years ago. It had taken public humiliation, a year of separation, and tremendous effort from both of them to achieve it. But it was real now, built on a foundation of mutual respect and hard-won understanding rather than on contracts and expectations. Lady Rutherford joined her in the doorway, following her gaze to where Gabriel was teaching Edward the words to another carol. "You have done well, my dear," the elderly woman said. "You had the wisdom to recognize a rare change of heart and the strength to accept it. That is a greater virtue than any of us possess." "He did that himself," Cordelia replied. "I simply gave him the opportunity." Many women would have refused that opportunity out of justified anger. You had the wisdom to recognize genuine change when you saw it. As the evening progressed and the family gathered for Christmas Eve dinner, Gabriel raised his glass in a toast. "To second chances," he said, looking directly at Cordelia, "and to the courage required to take them. 4 years ago, I made the worst decision of my life. 3 years ago, I compounded that error with cruelty. 2 years ago, my wife gave me an opportunity I did not deserve. And now, tonight, I can say with absolute certainty that I am the luckiest man in England. Not because of my title or my estates, but because I am married to a woman of extraordinary strength and grace, and because I have been given the privilege of raising 2 remarkable children. That is true wealth. That is what matters." "To second chances," the assembled guests echoed, raising their own glasses. Later that night, after the children were asleep and the guests had retired to their rooms, Gabriel and Cordelia walked through the portrait gallery at Huntley Court. They paused before a new painting that had been commissioned earlier that year, showing the entire family together at Weston House. Edward stood between his parents, one small hand in each of theirs. Victoria was cradled in Cordelia's arms. The background showed the gardens she remembered from her childhood. "This is who we are," Gabriel said quietly. "Not the Duke and Duchess performing for society, but simply a family that nearly was not, saved by courage and second chances. And love," Cordelia added. "Do not forget love." "How could I?" Gabriel pulled her close, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "You taught me what love actually means. Not possession or control, not duty or dynastic continuity, but genuine care for another person's well-being and happiness." They stood together in the quiet gallery, surrounded by portraits of generations of Morlands who had come before. But unlike those stern ancestors staring down from their gilded frames, Gabriel and Cordelia had learned something that titled aristocrats often forgot: that true nobility came from character, not bloodlines; that love chosen freely was worth infinitely more than love demanded by duty; and that sometimes the greatest strength was found in the willingness to admit fault and work to become better. The following morning, Christmas Day, the family attended services at the village church. As they walked through the snow-covered streets, Edward between them and Victoria bundled in her father's arms, Cordelia reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. From humiliation to redemption, from separation to reunion, from a marriage born of financial necessity to a partnership built on mutual respect and affection. It had not been easy. There had been moments when Cordelia had doubted Gabriel's sincerity, times when old hurts resurfaced and threatened to undermine their fragile new beginning. But through it all, Gabriel had remained patient and consistent, proving through 1,000 small actions that his transformation was genuine. And now, walking through her village with her husband and children, watching the villagers who had witnessed both her disgrace and her restoration offer smiles and Christmas greetings, Cordelia felt a peace she had never experienced during her first marriage. This was what partnership should feel like. This was what love could be when two people approached it with honesty and commitment. The sermon that Christmas morning was about forgiveness and redemption, themes that seemed almost too perfectly timed. As the vicar spoke about the possibility of change and the importance of second chances, Cordelia felt Gabriel reach for her hand and squeeze it gently. After the service, as they stood in the churchyard accepting good wishes from the parishioners, an elderly woman approached Cordelia with tears in her eyes. "Mrs. Morland," she said, then corrected herself. "Your Grace, I mean. Forgive me." "Mrs. Morland is fine," Cordelia assured her. "I just wanted to say how glad I am to see you happy. When your poor mother passed and the Duke, begging your pardon, Your Grace, when he treated you so poorly at the funeral, my heart broke for you. You deserved so much better." "Thank you, Mrs. Davies. That is very kind of you to say." The elderly woman looked at Gabriel, who had been listening quietly. "And you, Your Grace, you have done right by her at last. That takes a strong man, to admit he was wrong and work to make it right. Not many of your sort would have the courage." Gabriel nodded seriously. "You are correct, Mrs. Davies. It took me far too long to understand that. But I am grateful for the opportunity to learn, however belatedly." As they walked home through the winter afternoon, Edward insisted on trying to catch snowflakes while Victoria slept peacefully against her father's shoulder. Cordelia watched her family and marveled at how different this Christmas was from the one 2 years ago when she had confronted Gabriel at his engagement ball. Then, she had been driven by anger and hurt, determined to expose his cruelty and vindicate herself in the eyes of society. Now, she was simply grateful. Grateful for Gabriel's willingness to change, grateful for the family they had built, grateful for second chances that she had almost been too proud to accept. That evening, after the children were in bed, Gabriel presented Cordelia with one final Christmas gift. It was a leather-bound journal, its pages empty and waiting to be filled. "What is this for?" she asked. "For writing our story," Gabriel replied. "The real story, not the version that society whispers about in drawing rooms. Someday, Edward and Victoria will want to know how their parents found their way to each other. They should know the truth, the failures as well as the redemption, the mistakes as well as the forgiveness, so that they understand that love is not always perfect, but it can be real if both people are willing to work for it." Cordelia opened the journal and saw that Gabriel had already written the first page in his elegant handwriting. "This is the story of how I nearly destroyed the best thing in my life through pride and foolishness, and how my wife's courage gave me an opportunity I did not deserve to become the man I should have been all along. It is a story of second chances, hard-won wisdom, and love that was earned rather than assumed. May our children learn from both our failures and our redemption." She looked up at him with tears in her eyes. You really have changed." "I had no choice," Gabriel said simply. "You and Edward gave me a choice between becoming better or losing everything that actually mattered. It was not a difficult decision once I understood what the options truly were." They sat together by the fire that evening, planning the words they would write in the journal. The story of their marriage would be told honestly, including the painful parts, because their children deserved to understand that redemption was possible but required genuine effort and change. And so it was that the Duke and Duchess of Huntley, who had begun their marriage in cold calculation and nearly destroyed it through cruelty and pride, built a life together that was richer and deeper than either had imagined possible. Their story became known throughout the county, not as a cautionary tale, but as a testament to the power of second chances and the possibility of genuine transformation. Years later, when Edward was old enough to understand, Cordelia would sit with him in the library at Weston House and tell him the story of the Christmas Eve when she had walked into his father's engagement ball and changed everything. She would explain about the hard months that followed, about his father's gradual transformation, about the decision to give their marriage another chance. "Remember, Edward," she would tell her son, "that courage comes in many forms. Sometimes it takes courage to confront someone who has wronged you. But sometimes it takes even greater courage to forgive them when they prove willing to change." And Gabriel, listening from the doorway where Cordelia could not see him, would feel again the gratitude that had become his constant companion. Gratitude for a wife who had the strength to demand better treatment and the wisdom to recognize genuine change when it occurred. Gratitude for children who would grow up knowing that their father loved their mother, not because duty demanded it, but because he had learned through hard experience what actually mattered in life. The story of Gabriel and Cordelia Morland became legendary in their time. Not because it was romantic in the traditional sense, but because it was real. It acknowledged the capacity for cruelty that existed in even supposedly civilized people, while also celebrating the human capacity for growth and redemption. It reminded everyone who heard it that second chances were precious gifts, not to be wasted or taken lightly. And each Christmas Eve, as Gabriel and Cordelia renewed their vows in the small church where they had been remarried, they were reminded of the journey that had brought them there. From humiliation to healing, from separation to unity, from a marriage of convenience to a partnership of genuine affection and respect. It was not the fairy tale beginning that Cordelia had once foolishly hoped for, but it was perhaps something better. A real story of real people who had faced their worst selves and chosen to become better. And in the end, that was the most powerful kind of love story there was. Thank you so much for staying with us through this journey of heartbreak, courage, and redemption. If this story moved you, please subscribe and share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances. Your support helps us continue creating stories of love that must sometimes be lost before it can truly be found. Merry Christmas, and may you all find the courage to demand the respect you deserve, and the wisdom to recognize genuine change when it appears.